All right. So when we left off, we were talking about decision making and judgments. We were talking about how we can kind of go off the rails with our thought processes and our logical judgments through a couple of incorrect thought processes, available heuristics, fixation, confirmation bias, overconfidence framing, belief perseverance, and using our intuition. So that's one of the things that we talked about. The next thing that we need to talk about is centered around the I don't want to say the creation of, but the learning of language. Okay, this is part of the cognition sphere. It is part of what it means to think, because remember, cognition is all of the unseen mental processes that are going on inside your head. Remembering, thinking, problem solving, language skills, things like that, things that go on inside our head that we can't see. The kid's name is probably Doug. Actually, it's Skylar. The kid's name is Doug Skylar Parker Jr. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if I forget what it was called, but there was I think it was, I don't know if it was a Twitter account or what, but they were cataloging the strange names that they were seeing inside their kids' classrooms, and that was, that it's an over exaggeration, obviously, but that was a lot of what Skylar was. Is well, it's SCK EIGHLYR Skylar. Yeah. Let me just see this. Hold on. SCK EIGHLYR. Yeah. True, but these people in these people in Utah are taking it to an absolute extreme. They would probably name their child Kiwi, but they wouldn't spell it just KIWI. It would be KEIGH WEE. Or that's another good one. Yeah, exactly. So anyway, let's get back to language. We talked about language development back when we were talking about human development, back in unit number 5, back in November. This is kind of a retouching on it. Basically, through a child's development, their language skills go from very, very basic skills to more and more complicated skills. And it's a fairly fast process when it really comes right down to it. For example, infants are unable to speak or communicate hardly anything at all. But by about 4 months old, they begin to enter what we call the babbling stage. Okay, they start doing these sound-like syllables. So they are using, they're imitating adult speech. So basically, whatever their parents are saying to them, they're trying to repeat it back, but they are really, really struggling with it. They can't actually do it, but they're getting control of their vocal cords, their mouth, their lips, their tongue, and their breathing to be able to make those sounds. By about 10 months, the babbling begins to change. And the babbling becomes more focused on the home language that is being spoken. So at between 4 and 10 months, so that 6-month period of the early child's life, whatever language they happen to be hearing, they will start to repeat back those sounds. So if they are in a Japanese house and they're speaking Japanese, then they will start to babble by 10 months back with those Japanese sounding syllables. If they are in an English household, they'll babble back in English sounds, because we are capable of creating a whole bunch of different sounds, but languages only use a certain set of them. Okay. Interesting thing with deaf children, their babbling actually is with their hands. So they're babbling sign language. So they're getting control over the dexterity in their fingers so that they can communicate that way. So babbling happens whether they can hear or not. Kind of an interesting thing. At about a year old, the child will start to be able to use one word sentences. They can say one word. Then they begin to very slowly incorporate more and more words into their vocabulary. So it starts off typically with mama, dada, baba, whatever. Okay, so it's very, very slow. By about 18 months, they go from learning a word in a week to learning a word in a day. And so their language skills become far, far greater, far, far faster. And they're able to gain a larger and larger vocabulary. By the time they are 2 years old, they are in the two-word stage where they can put together two words to create meaning. Dada up. Oh, you want to be picked up. Dada down. Put the kid down. Baba, milk. Oh, you want milk in your bottle. Okay. So they can give you two words to be able to formulate meaning. This is telegraphic speech, and the word telegraphic speech goes back to the use of the telegram. Telegrams were written in a very, very brief manner because you were being charged by the letter that was being tapped out on the telegraph lines. So you didn't, put everything into the thing. It was, very, very short sentences, very, very short things to convey as much meaning as you could, as cheaply as you possibly could. Okay. But it makes sense, and that meaning is being proved out there. Now, a famous linguist, a person who studies language, his name is Noam Chomsky, and we've talked about him before. He believed that language contains kind of a universal grammar. What he found in his studies of language was that pretty much all languages share a very similar grammar structure. There are nouns, there are verbs, there are adjectives, there are, all kinds of different things. The vocabulary is going to be different. The way things are pronounced are going to be different. And sometimes the word order is going to be different. But we all kind of share the extreme basics. Okay. And he also is the one who came up with the idea of the learning acquisition device, something we talked about back in November. He believes that we have an inbuilt computer program that basically teaches us how to acquire a language. And it happens whether we want it to happen or not. If you are not exposed to a language early in your life, by about the age of 7 or 8, that language acquisition device kind of shuts off, and you're not going to be able to acquire the rules of that language. Okay. For example, I grew up in Seattle. Seattle is not very well known for being ethnically diverse. At least it wasn't when I was growing up. My high school was 96% white, 4% other. Anyway, not a lot of foreign languages being spoken on campus on any given day. The most that you would probably ever hear is people studying for their language class that was coming up next. Anyway, as a child, I was only ever exposed to English, okay, which I can, pretty reliably speak, although some people have argued not all that reliable. Anyway, so So, my first experience with a foreign language came when I was a freshman. I was a ninth grader, and I took a German class. I took 2 years of German in high school, and then I took 2 more years of German in college. And in my German classes at the University of Oregon, I was not good. Little tip, if they let you take a language class, pass, no pass, and you don't have to have it graded, take it pass, no pass, because if you pass it, it doesn't affect your GPA. And if you don't pass it, it doesn't affect your GPA. And yeah, that's important. If you want to make sure you're getting, scholarships and stuff. Anywho, I really don't know very much in German. I can pick out words here and there, and I can kind of get the gist of what the person is talking about, but I cannot have a conversation in German. My exposure to it was far after the closing of that language acquisition device window. I have tried to learn other languages since then. I took Duolingo courses in Swedish so that when I went to Sweden, I could, at least attempt to communicate with people. But basically, I didn't really learn that much. And if I were to go back to Duolingo to learn more, which I did learn a lot, I would basically have to start all over again because I don't have it. My daughter, on the other hand, she is obviously being exposed to English because it's what we speak, but she's also being exposed to Farsi. That's the language that my wife and my mother-in-law speak because they are from Iran. Okay, so they're speaking Farsi around her, and she's getting little bits and pieces of Farsi. My wife took many years of German through high school and college because she was a chemistry major. And guess what? The Germans invented chemistry. So if you want to know more about chemistry, learn German. Anyway, so she speaks a little bit of German. Her pronunciation's really bad, though. And so she is trying to expose my daughter to a little bit of German language as well. And I'm trying to get her a little bit of Swedish. Okay. What little I remember, which is basically, I don't speak Swedish, which is jag talar inte svenska. I do not speak Swedish. I could also give her the other phrase that I really remember well, which is min bror undervisar I kinesiska, which is my brother teaches in Chinese. I don't have a brother. And if I did, he probably wouldn't be teaching in Chinese. Why did I learn that? Because Duolingo taught it to me. I don't know why. So the fact of the matter is that language becomes extremely difficult to learn after that language acquisition device closes for most adults. Okay. It's difficult, if not nearly impossible, to get another language after that closes. So I want to make sure that my daughter is exposed to as much foreign language as she possibly can get at this point, so that when she grows up, it's not I only speak English because I'm an American. It's, I speak English and Spanish and a little bit of French, and I speak some German and a little bit of Swedish, and I speak Farsi, and I speak and I speak and I speak because, holy crap, that's impressive. And I want her to be impressive. Now, when we are thinking in our heads, we are thinking usually without language. We are usually thinking in mental imagery. Now, one of the things that we can do is we can actually practice what we want to do using only mental imagery. Okay, let me give you an example of this. The University of Tennessee women's basketball team was studied, and their ability to shoot free throws was analyzed after a physical practice where they're actually physically practicing free throw shooting, as well as a mental practice where they are walking themselves through the process of shooting free throws. And what they found was that after a physical practice, the team had about a 52% average of free throw shooting. Okay, which is about 50% better than Shaq. Sorry, I had to. Wasn't good at free throws. However, after a mental practice, that percentage increased to a 65% free throw shooting percentage, which for a team overall, that's pretty good. Okay. During the mental practice, the players repeatedly imagined making foul shots under a variety of different circumstances. For example, the other team trash talking them, the crowd being super loud, the crowd being super quiet, things like that. They were imagining different situations and how they would shoot the free throws. Okay. So after you've managed to master a skill, if you know how to do something really, really well, physical practice can only take you so much further unless you're pushing the boundaries of what you're doing. But if you need to practice the basics, a mental practice is actually really good for you because it's actually working out those neural connections between your brain and your muscles being able to do it. Okay, it's strengthening the connection between the two so that when you go back to physical practice again, it comes right back to you and you can get it more and more and more. You may have seen something similar to this if you've ever watched the movie Cool Runnings. Cool Runnings, I believe, is on Disney Plus. Not 1,000% sure, but I think it is. It's about the Jamaican bobsled team in the 1988 Calgary Winter Olympics. Basically, these guys from Jamaica who don't have ice became a bobsled team because reasons. And they needed to practice, but weren't able to practice physically more than they were allowed. And so what they did to practice mentally was they all climbed into the bathtub of the hotel they were staying at the Olympic Village, and they rode down the thing. They're like, okay, turn 1, everybody turns this way. Okay, turn 2, turn 3. And they mentally practiced the movements that they were going to be doing on the ice so they could get more and more practice. Okay. So imagining those things brings those to the forefront and makes us think about it and build the connections in our heads. Okay. What if you speak to them 2 languages? Are they more likely to speak one language than another? Not necessarily. I've seen this in my students who speak Spanish and English. The students that I've had in the past they can switch back and forth between the two. It isn't that they have a preference for one; it's whoever they happen to be talking to. Another example of this in Canada, they have 2 official languages, French and in English. But there's only one part of Canada that speaks French, and that's the province of Quebec. Now, about I want to say 7-8 years ago, my wife and we went to Montreal, which is kind of the headquarters of Quebec, to visit some family of hers who lives there. And whenever we were in like a store or something like that, everybody would look at you and say, bonjour, hi. So they were saying hello in both languages. Bonjour, hi, bonjour, hi. And if you responded to them with bonjour, they would speak French to you. If you responded with hi, they would speak English to you. My wife didn't catch on until I told her what was happening, because I didn't catch on until the last day. Like I'm just like, why do they keep speaking French to you? You don't speak French. I don't know why they're speaking French to me. Well, it finally dawned on me when they said, bonjour, hi. And she said, bonjour. And then they started speaking French to her, and she just kind of standing there. Yeah, I don't know what you're saying. They were testing, do you speak French or do you speak English? And they would respond accordingly. They were raised with the ability to speak both languages, and they don't necessarily they maybe have a preference, but they can both speak it very fluently enough that they can just speak the language. So I don't necessarily think that there is a preference for one over the other, but it kind of depends on the situation. Okay, if you're surrounded by Karens at a Home Depot in Salt Lake City, you're probably not going to be speaking a lot of Spanish because you're going to get a lot of dirty looks and a lot of people going, ew, you speak Spanish? In America, we speak English. Whereas if you're, at somebody's quinceañera, you're probably not going to be speaking a lot of English, depending on who it is, I suppose. So I don't necessarily think that it's a preferential thing. How do people know like 20 languages? They're exposed to them from a very early age. And even if they're not exposed to them, once you learn Spanish, you kind of have a gateway into Portuguese and Italian and French because they're all Romance languages. They're all kind of based on Latin, and they have similar rules. Just like if you're exposed to German, you'll be able to more easily adjust into learning Dutch and Swedish and Norwegian and Danish and Czech and all these other kind of thing. That one I don't know about, because it isn't Tagalog like have Spanish stuff in it because it was colonized by Spain. I'm not 1,000% sure. I haven't had a lot of exposure to Filipino language. Okay. So yeah, then they'd probably be able to pick that up a little bit easier as well. But you have to be exposed to one of those language groups early on. Just like if I were to expose my daughter to the Russian language, she might be able to pick up, Lithuanian or Ukrainian or, other languages that are based on that type of a thing. So it really you have to be exposed to it from an early age. And if you're not, it just ain't going to happen. Doesn't make you a bad person. It just means you're going to be one of those people holding the French English dictionary on the streets of Paris going, bonjour. German mange la fenêtre. Germange la fenêtre. Which is, I have eaten the window in really bad French. Je mange la fenêtre. Singing La Vie en Rose. Yeah. Or, Frère Jacques. Frère Jacques. No? Okay. Bonjour. Exactly. Yeah. I think I can get to 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that's as far as I can go. If I pushed myself, I can remember up to probably about 15 in Swedish. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 4, 8, 9, 10, 11. I can get to 11. German, I can just keep counting in German. German's an easy one to count because it's after you get to 20, it's 20 and 1, 20 and 2, 20 and 3, 20 and 4, and it's literally 20 and 1. Actually, it's 1 and 20, but you get the idea. Ichi ni san. That's the only I can get to 3 in Japanese. After that, I got no idea. Yeah. Anyway, the last thing that we need to talk about is how animals think and how animals use language, because humans believe that we are super special and that there is nothing on this planet like us. And there isn't. But we need to give animals a little bit more credit than what they're given for being intelligent. For example, animals are a lot smarter than we think that they are. For example, pigeons can actually categorize things by concept. Okay, so let's say you teach a pigeon what a chair is. Okay, and you can do that. If you show them a picture of a chair that they've never seen before, but is obviously a chair, they can categorize that into the chair category, and they have a brain the size of a peanut. Okay, they're not all that smart. Pigeons are pretty dumb when it comes right down to it, but they can sort things into categories and concepts. So If they can do it, you can do it. Okay. An African gray parrot, like the one seen here, named Alex, was able to name and categorize objects as well as comprehend numbers up to 6. So he understood the concept of 6 things. 7, he started getting a little fuzzy on. Okay. When you add, he could also add 2 small clusters of objects and announce the sum. He could indicate which of 2 numbers was greater. Which is, again, he's a parrot. He's a little bird that lives in a cage its entire life. And he could do addition. So animals do have the ability to understand numbers, something that up until very recently we didn't think was possible as human beings. Animals were also capable of insight. Okay, we talked about that on Friday when we talked about that moment where your right temporal lobe kind of clicks on and everything makes sense suddenly. Animals have that same ability. Okay, in this experiment, a chimpanzee was put into a cage. He was given a short stick. Just outside the reach of the short stick, on the outside of the cage, was a piece of fruit that the chimpanzee wanted. Also outside the cage was a longer stick that was in range of the shorter stick. After several failed attempts to get to the fruit with the short stick, the chimp eventually had that moment of insight of, oh, uses the short stick to get the long stick and then uses the long stick to get the fruit. Okay, that moment of insight was enormous for them. Okay, chimpanzees also in the wild use tools. Okay, famously they use sticks or reeds to dig termites out of termite mounds. Okay, they like to eat insects out in the wild. It's one source of protein that is, much slower than the chimpanzee is. So they stick a stick down into the termite mound and they can eat the termites off of the stick. That's tool use. They also are capable of being able to open up nuts by hitting them with rocks or tree logs. Now, the interesting thing in this is that that tool use can also show the culture of the animal itself and the grouping that they live in. Now, when I say culture, most people think, oh, they were talking about arts and we're talking about music and we're talking about cultural things. Not necessarily. When we talk about culture, we're talking about things that are passed on, knowledge that gets passed on from one generation to the next, to the next, to the next. And in the wild, we can actually see different cultures of chimpanzees separated by natural barriers. For example, big rivers, okay? On one side of the big river, the chimpanzees use a stick to dig out termites out of the termite mound and then pick the termites off the stick one by one. And when they eat a nut, they crush it with a rock. On the other side of the river, those same species of chimpanzees use the stick and dig out the termite mounds, but instead of picking them off one by one, they just eat them straight off the stick like it's a cob of corn, okay? And then, when they want to eat nuts, they don't use a rock, they use a big log, okay? And what we see is that there is a transfer of that knowledge from one generation to the next. And because they don't interact with one another, because the river is in the way and they can't get to one another, they live slightly different lives. And that is an example of culture out in the wild, okay, with a wild animal, okay. We also have seen animals use language. They've even been able to use human language. An example of this, in the 1960s, zoologists taught a gorilla sign language, and they were able to communicate with the gorilla. What's even more impressive is that once that gorilla had a child, the gorilla taught that child sign language. Now, this was not complicated sign language. The gorilla had a vocabulary of that of about a 2-year-old. But the fact that we had interspecies communication, that is wild to think about, that one day we'll be able to actually communicate with the dog and the cat in the house instead of, shoving their face in the little pile of poo they left. We go, hey, stop doing that. I got to clean that up. Sorry, I really needed to go. Kind of an interesting idea. What's also interesting, and I think I remember reading about this in the last couple of years, is that they were actually doing studies and they were finding that we're really, really close to being able to communicate with dolphins. Now, we have been studying dolphins for a very long time. And what we are finding is that they have similar clicks and whistles and different sounds that they make, and that we can start to understand. We're starting to decipher what some of these things mean. Now, how close are we? I have absolutely no idea. But the fact that we are close to interspecies communication, that's pretty cool when it comes right down to it. So animals do a lot more thinking and a lot more understanding than we sometimes give them credit for. The main difference between the human brain and the animal brain is simply computing power. And that computing power is down to the number of neurons that we've got compared to the number of neurons that they've got. Okay. Dogs and cats, they have brains the size of walnuts. Okay. They're not doing a ton of thinking, but they are doing more thinking than we think that they are. All right. So that is the sum total of all of that. You can do 1 to 10 in Japanese because you took karate. Yeah. All I can do is Ichi-ni-san. 1, 2, 3. That's all I got. So what you're saying, Alexa, is that you have a yellow belt and you don't just tie it to your head a la the Karate Kid and walk around. What are you even doing with your life? Like,
I don't even know.
Yeah, that's crazy. You should just be walking around wearing that yellow belt as a badge of honor. And then when Mr. Concha asks you about it, talk to him for like days.
I can try to find it. Let me find. You
know what? And I can say that because the chances of you ever talking to Mr. Concha again are probably around 0. Unless, of course, you have him this year. Then you just need to show up to your class. Got your yellow belt on.
I'm trying to make a fire right now, and now there's smoke all over the house. So that's great.
You're trying to start a fire, and now there's smoke throughout your house. Well,
Alexa, did you try cooking again?
Stay near the floor.
Not this time. I tried. It's because it's cold.